Good morning, everyone. My name is John. Welcome to this week's IPC Journal Club. I say good morning, but it could be good afternoon. It could be good night, depending on where you are in the world. I'm delighted to say we've got Professor Brett Mitchell joining us today to talk about the fabulous CLEAN study that's just recently been published in the Lancet Infectious Diseases. So just before I hand over to Brett, just a few points about what this journal club is trying to achieve in case you're new to the journal club today. So what we're trying to keep it topical and have something that is a paper that's likely to generate discussion. I'm certain that this one will. I've got about 500 million questions. I'll try and keep my mouth shut and let everybody else have a go. We want to provide opportunities for professional development for you as well, and exercise some critical thinking skills, and ultimately build some confidence so that you can go away and pick up a paper, read it, analyse it, and ideally present it to Journal Club. We're always open to guest presenters, as we're having today with Brett joining us. We want to try and foster a network and also, ideally, have a bit of fun. So Brett, it's got to be fun, okay?
All right, I'll try my best.
Try and make science
Try
fun.
my best.
So the Journal Club is hosted by IPC Partners, and just a reminder, we've got the chat and the Q&A. If you can put your questions into the Q&A and save the chat for more general stuff, that would be great. So the format is Brett's going to introduce the paper, and then it'll be open to Q&A, but do please ping your questions in as we go and as they occur to you. And then Phil is going to lead us off in the Q&A when Brett has finished. So Brett, I'm not going to do a bio. You can do that.
Please don't.
I'm going to hand over to you, Brett.
Thanks so much, John. Thanks, John, and thanks, Phil, for the invitation. And really great to be with you from Australia. I'm going to start presenting. So I'm going to lose my slides. Can you, unless I hear from you, John, I assume you can see a slide, hopefully not the presenter view.
Yeah, we can see the slides, Brett.
Beautiful, lovely, thanks. So I'm here to talk about the CLEAN study today, and I'm just going to zip through it pretty quickly, and just parts of the CLEAN study because I think a lot of value probably comes from the discussion. There's plenty of QR codes which link to the website, which got lots of information. There'll be lots more coming on that website in due course, which I'll allude to as I go through my talk. So this project was funded by a government competitive grant, and so that's the funding source for this, and the study was registered with the Australian Clinical Trials Registry. Now, I want to start with the problem that we were trying to fix, and I suspect, well, I pretty much know this is a problem everywhere across the world, and it's this issue of shared medical equipment, who's cleaning it, does it get cleaned, how can we improve this? And the same problem happens in the hospital that I work at. And a few years ago, when I started back there, one of the clinical nurse consultants said to me, "Oh, Brett, can I get your opinions on how can we improve this cleaning of shared medical equipment?" And I thought to myself, oh my God, we're still having this discussion. I remember having this discussion 15 years ago. We've got to find a better, we've got to do something about this. So I just went back to the crux of the issue, if you like. And for me, the important thing here, the starting point for me was, does it actually matter that we clean or don't clean shared medical equipment? Now, if it does, and there might be aesthetic reasons why we want to do it, and there might be general hygienic reasons why we want to do it, but it doesn't make a difference to patient outcomes. Because if it doesn't, then that changes the dialogue that we need to have. If it does, then that also changes the dialogue we want to have. So that was the genesis for doing this, to provide high quality evidence around the impact of cleaning shared medical equipment. Now, knowing the audience, I'm not going to really harp on this, but we know pathogens can survive for long periods of time in the environment. We know from epidemiological based studies that if you're admitted to a room where the prior occupant had a certain MRO, there's a high risk of you acquiring that same MRO. So we know from observational studies that the environment is an important risk. We know from other studies that Dev Anderson, John Boyce, and others have done about the importance of certain terminal cleans and routine cleaning. But the gap really is about shared medical equipment. None of those studies have really looked at shared medical equipment that's used between patients on a daily basis. There was a study from Andy Lee done in Australia a few years ago, and they screened everybody in and out of ICU and screened the environment. And they did implicate the transmission of VRE through some shared medical equipment between patients in the ICU setting. And that got us thinking about we need to do an RCT that demonstrates whether if you improve cleaning of this equipment, does it make a difference to patient outcomes? And we think that this will then provide evidence to help inform a problem globally, and the package of work to come from this study, which I'll allude to later, will hopefully help that. So we call it the CLEAN study, the Cleaning and Enhanced Disinfection study. And there are many parts to this study. There's a randomized controlled trial part where we're going to talk about the effectiveness of additional cleaning on healthcare-associated infections, and I'm going to touch on that today. The full results I'm going to talk about at IPS and the IPC conference in November, the IPS next week. The thoroughness of cleaning, I was going to touch on that today. So we looked at, you put extra cleaning in, but did it work? The cost effectiveness of this program, and I'm going to present some early results of that at IPS next week. We also have a bunch of other work in parallel to this, time and motion study. So how long does it actually take to clean pieces of equipment? Because that will help plan models of cleaning care. And I'm going to present that at IPS and the IPC conference. Cleaner interviews. So what are the cleaners actually like in terms of receiving feedback and how they receive feedback and the practical side of that? That's going to be at IPS. The practical considerations we're working on, so that includes all the resources that we developed for this trial, we're going to make publicly available. But we're also going to do scenario modeling, which might make sense later on. But once we've done cost effectiveness, we want to model different ways of actually tackling this problem with different parameters, input costs and output costs and effectiveness costs, to see what options there might be about actually implementation, the best way to implement this. So I'm going to talk today really just focusing on the main results from the randomized controlled trial, which was published a couple of weeks ago in the Lancet. We did a step-wedge randomized controlled trial in one hospital. Every ward starts in a control phase. 2 wards made up a cluster, and every 6 weeks, a cluster moved over from control to intervention. That and allocation was randomized. And we did point prevalence studies on every single patient in hospital for every single infection every fortnight. So our primary outcome was the proportion of all inpatients with any healthcare associated infection. And you think of most cleaning studies that are done to date, they're focused on a particular infection. Taking this approach helped us get over some of the power-related issues that we need to. So it's a bit of a novel design as well. We had some pre-specified subgroup analyses, so they were surgical site, bloodstream, UTIs, and pneumonias combined, and then some other ones you can see on the screen, as well as some secondary outcomes to which I've alluded to before. So the intervention was 3 hours per weekday for additional cleaning, purely dedicated to the cleaning of shared medical equipment. So we employed cleaners ourselves, or indirectly, but who reported to the research team, who received training and then went and did this 3 hours of additional cleaning on a ward. Wards varied from about 25 to 35 beds, and they had 3 hours to do that cleaning. I'll talk a bit more about that later. They received upfront training, and then they received refresher training based on the audit and feedback results using the UV lights, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, the UV dots, which are invisible to the naked eye. When you shine a little torch under them, you can see them. So we could measure both in the control and intervention phase the thoroughness of cleaning, and in the intervention phase, we fed that back to the cleaning staff to help improve cleaning, to identify areas that were being missed. 2-in-1 disinfectant wipes were being used, and we did that auditing fortnightly of shared medical equipment. That little green tag there too, when a piece of equipment was cleaned and put into generally on the ward somewhere, generally all the equipment was stored on the ward, clinical staff could grab something that they knew were clean for the next use. In the standard of care was no additional cleaning. So it was business as usual, really, which is clinical staff were responsible for cleaning shared medical equipment. So when you use it, you clean it. But we did do the UV fluorescent marker audits during that time, but we did not feed that back to the clinical staff. This is the shared medical equipment that we're interested in. And
sorry to interrupt. something a little weird happening with the slides. It looks like each participant has got control over the slides. So if you could just let us know which slide you're on, we can click along with you.
Okay, cool. Sorry. I'm on the slide that says shared medical equipment, and it's a bunch of shared medical equipment. So it's, you got commodes and drip stands and things like that. So if you find that slide.
So that's slide 20, folks.
Slide 20, beautiful, thanks. These are the types of shared medical equipment that I was referring to that we cleaned. So move to the next slide, straight on to the results. This is in the unadjusted results. There were 5,000 people in the study, similar numbers in the control and intervention as it turned out, and similar males and females. 430 odd healthcare associated infections from around 2,500 patients in the control phase. 300 from a similar number in the intervention phase. That's unadjusted. And when you model that, because you have to model that as part of doing step wage designs and secular trends and modeling delays in intervention effects, we found that the control phase had just about 15% people had a HAI and just around 10% in the intervention. So you can see the odds ratios there, which corresponds to a relative reduction or relative difference of 34%, an absolute reduction of 5%. So really high reductions. We can talk about that because I'm sure it's going to come up, but I'll note the high control phase rates too. It also might become clear when we talk about this. So the UV dots on the next slide. Well, graph A is the fluorescent dots, the proportion of items cleaned during the study over time. So you would expect, of course, as more wards move into that intervention phase, you're going to see hopefully more items cleaned, and that's what we saw. About 1,800 audits were undertaken during that study. I think the more interesting thing is the bottom graph, graph B, and what that vertical line in the middle represents is the intervention phase. Everything to the left of that, the further you are to the left, the further you're away from the intervention start time. The further you are to the right, the further you are into the intervention. So it's a very good visual to say that there's an immediate effect of the intervention. That is, we put in extra cleaning, and cleaning thoroughness went up, and it continued to increase through that audit and feedback process. So we saw significant improvements in the thoroughness of cleaning, which you'd hope, but this is a way to test fidelity of the intervention as well. Next slide. In terms of confounders and other studies, there were no policy changes such as screening and isolation practices. It was mixed hospital with single rooms, small numbers of single rooms, mainly 2 beds, 4 bedrooms, no Nightingale style wards. No reports of outbreaks. There were no changes in colonization pressure, which we measured through those number of people under transmission-based precautions. No long-term secular trends. Of course, one of the problems with particularly step wedge, but other designs, you can ride the wave and you can find an intervention effect. If you've got a line that's going down, and at some point you start your intervention, and at some point you end your intervention, and you do a before and after, you could make any intervention look like it works because the trend was always going down. So you have to monitor those secular trends. We did that through external data, and there were no secular trends. Hand hygiene remained constant. And sensitivity analysis, we pulled individual infections in and out of the analysis. We pulled individual wards in and out of the analysis, and we modeled different delays. And the results held true through all those sensitivity analyses. Next slide, which is the conclusions, and then we can have a bit of a chat. The intervention was effective at increasing the thoroughness of cleaning and reducing the prevalence of healthcare-associated infections. Essentially, at baseline, 1 in 7 patients had a healthcare-associated infection, and this reduced to 1 in 10 during the intervention phase, and that enhanced cleaning and disinfection of shared medical equipment can reduce healthcare-associated infections. That QR code, I'm sure we can share, but the study website's cleanstudy.com, and there'll be a lot more resources that will come up on that study website. But I'll stop sharing, and have I stopped sharing? No, I haven't. And I will hand back to you, John and Phil. There we go.
Thanks very much, Brett. Great presentation, and I've read the paper, but it's always nice to have somebody bring it to life and talk about their experience. So yeah, people can use the Q&A box to ask any questions for Brett. But John has just put a link to the clean study in the chat as well, if anybody wants to check out the website. If I can kick off, Brett, I had a question around the training that was provided to the staff. What did that look like? Who did it? How was it done?
Yeah.
Can you provide some details?
Yeah, of course. I'll preface all this by saying we will make all this publicly available once the cost effectiveness analysis, all the results, all the presentations we use, all the training material we'll put open source on the website. But training consisted of 1 hour training to start with. It started with the principles of why cleaning is important. It talked about survival of pathogens in the environment. And it talked about the important role that cleaners, because this was targeted for cleaning stuff. And we don't use the term cleaners. They're called a variety of things in Australia, environmental services and PSAs. But for the purposes of this, I'll just talk about cleaners. So it covered those sort of principles of how to clean, the directionality of cleaning, pressure of cleaning, and practically sat down and practiced on pieces of equipment to practice cleaning. So that was the upfront training, and then for refresher training was tailored based on the audit results that we were seeing, but pretty much focusing on, okay, we're missing this, or we need to improve that, and doing that one-on-one, often with, or one in small groups with individuals. So the person doing the training was our trial coordinator, Kate Brown, and she developed all the resources. Our data collector was remotely, and they were blinded to the data collection process. So they had no idea whether a person was in a control or intervention ward, for example, when they were determining those HAI outcomes.
Okay, very thorough. Just one follow-up question. How important do you think that kind of, if you were going to try and sustain those results over, the next period, or keep it on either a downward trajectory or keep it similar, how important do you think training would be as part of that?
So important. I mean, it's a question I've been asked a lot for the last few weeks, actually. And they'd say, what do you think is the most important thing in this trial? And I said, three things. There's the upfront training, because there's an assumption that cleaners get trained. And in my experience, they don't. And interestingly, we found that in many other states, found in all the hospitals I go to, the managers will tell you they get trained, but they don't. You ask the cleaning staff, they haven't received training, or if they have, it might have been 10 years ago. So upfront training, the refresher training was approximately monthly, give or take. And without that audit and feedback, you're not going to see continual drive in that growth. You're going to lose interest. By and large, the cleaning staff wanted to do the right thing. They saw the importance of this in terms of patient safety, and they were really motivated to try and to do better. And providing that data was so important to do that. And then, of course, the third component being the additional cleaning with cleaning time to actually do it with a detergent disinfectant wipe. So I think those three things are all important in terms of the results we saw.
Okay, sort of related to that, Brett, I noticed in the study that almost 20% of your cleaning shifts, if you want to call them that, weren't filled. And Alma's asked a really good question around the cleaning and the training as to whether the people doing the cleaning took up the intervention easily, or was there any resistance?
They're great questions. So, okay, a few things. I love those questions, because this is where you get the nuts and bolts, isn't it? So the short answer to the cleaning, to the last part of that question, it was a difficult thing to initially recruit. Well, actually, no, it was a difficult. Initially, it wasn't difficult. It became more difficult to retain staff to do this trial, because they found it monotonous, and of course, they knew that we were working with them, but ultimately checking up on them. They saw it as that. So there was a lot of turnover initially, but we also had a core group that did stay through the path, and were really committed to it. And this goes to the implementation part, which we're going to hope may not get time to talk about today, but later talks, where we'll think about other ways to do this, to help overcome some of those issues. In terms of the amount of cleaning, Not every ward received that 3 hours every day. Sometimes it was 2 hours. We had staffing challenges just like everybody does. So there's a real pragmatic element to this trial. By and large, most of the time people got 2 hours every day. There's a few days here and there that couldn't happen. And we also found that there were times where halfway through the trial, the thoroughness of cleaning actually started to decrease in one audit period. And that was because we had some staffing challenges. And interestingly, the same corresponding period, delayed 2 weeks, but same corresponding period, infection rates went up again. And I not want to draw much of a conclusion from that, other than to say that happened twice in the study, and both times we saw thoroughness dropping, we saw an increase in infections. Yeah, really important. One of the other papers that we're just talking about doing is actually a dose response type paper, because we've got data on the cleaning hours. We know when the audits were actually undertaken, and the timing of those audits, and the timing of infections. So, and we kind of know from the study when infections are likely to happen, in terms of modeling those delays. So we're thinking about like a dose response to see what would be the ideal hours, if you like, to make this effective. So that's going to be one to come next year.
Great, thanks, Brett. We've got lots of questions coming in the Q&A now, which is good. Nick, hello Nick, asks, were there any other support mechanisms for training implemented, like shadowing or supervision?
No, not formally, only through those refresher training processes. Certainly in that initial training, that 1 hour, yep, there was that shadowing going on there, but after that, no. And by and large, the cleaners had their own ward or wards that they were going and delivering out to. And that was also deliberate, so we avoid contamination. But I don't think contamination, I'm just on that, contamination is an issue, because really the cleaning staff don't have enough time to clean what they're supposed to clean on the ward anyway, and they're never responsible for cleaning the shared medical equipment. So the contamination issue isn't really a risk. There's a contamination issue of clinical staff in that intervention phase saying, we're noticing this extra cleaning going on, maybe we should do it ourselves. But ultimately, that's not a bad thing. If it works to get people to clean, then great. So yeah, that could be one of those effects, I guess.
Brett.
Okay, carrying on then the theme of sort of the practicalities of implementing this intervention. Tom from Imperials asked us whether there was any nervousness amongst the cleaning staff around the types of equipment they were cleaning. He's seen, and I've seen as well, that staff don't want to clean the electronics. They're worried they might break them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, there was. When we first started doing this study, the cleaning staff said, hang on, we're not supposed to touch some of this stuff. And so part of that training was to say you are, when it's not connected to a patient, for things like the actual pump itself, but the drip stand and things like that, they could do. So anything in storage they could do. But there was a big degree of nervousness, but we had the authority and ability to say, no, you can do that, and you can do that in the context of this trial, and we didn't have any issues.
Great, thanks, Brett. Just sticking with the product which you've referred to as being a combined cleaning and disinfection wipe. Cherry asks, did you change any of the cleaning or decontamination products from those already in use? And was everybody using the same product across the study sites prior to starting?
Yes, they were. So the product was available for use prior to the study, and clinical staff could use that product to clean between. But what we know is they weren't doing it. In fact, some of the rates in the control phase are as low as 5%. And now that's 5% in a 24-hour period, right? So cleaned once in a 24-hour period. So that's exceptionally low. That's, we're not talking about clean 5% of the time between every patient here. We're talking about 5% in one 24-hour period. So, and they were critical things like drip stands that you could argue are really important in dressing trolleys. So particularly in the context of things like surgical site infections. So I think those probably low rates were what was happening with the type of product that was still available and used in the intervention phase.
Okay.
Brett, can I throw something in? I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but in a way, this was the wrong intervention. Let me explain. As in,
Yep.
this was a once a day cleaning of all the equipment stored in a room, or a short period of time. What you'd really want to do is focus on cleaning between patient uses to have the maximum impact of infection. And yet I think that was mentioned in the paper. And yet, despite that, you saw this massive, gargantuan 35% percentage point reduction in healthcare associated infection. Has anyone challenged the sort of biological plausibility of that in terms of the scale of the reduction?
Yeah, totally. And I'll come to that challenging of it. And in response to your comment about the wrong study question, it probably was, but as it turns out, it probably isn't, because what we know is that cleaning well at least once a day, and I'm not advocating for once a day only, by the way, but cleaning well at least once a day, which might be because it was cleaned so well. It might be because some of these things were not being, because they were available, clinical staff could pick something that was cleaned, and et cetera, et cetera. There might be some residual effect from disinfectant products, et cetera. So we did see that effect despite that. Now, 35% is really high. And when this study, the results were kept from me and the team. The statistician did them independendly. And just before we're going to disclose them to the team, we had a big meeting. There's going to be this big sort of disclosure meeting, if you like, and we're going to record it and watch all our faces with disappointment, because I was actually expecting we wouldn't see a reduction. Anyway, about a week or so, two before, the statistician said, I do really need to talk to you about these results. Anyway, so she showed me the results, and she said, I'd rather had other people check them. And then we became to, with all that sensitivity analysis, everything we did held up. And so then we go, okay, what is the biological plausibility of this? And this goes to this endogenous transmission discussion, really. And I guess it comes to the point of, at what point do we think that, at what point do we call something endogenous? If we go to a hospital and I'm in hospital 24 hours, I will probably start to change, my microflora and flora will probably start to change pretty quickly. Now, are we calling that endogenous transmission, or are we calling it and exogenous still in terms of it's not our normal flora? So I think we've probably gone too hard on the view that endogenous transmission is not really important, and there's some people that would argue that case. I think this challenges that sort of concept quite a bit. I think the other reason why we saw big reductions is because really high rates of infection. And we saw exceptionally low rates of cleanliness cleaning undertaken. Now, I suspect that the latter is common in hospitals. The former may not be. One of the things we're going to do in the cost effectiveness analysis to test this out even more is, I'm going to give it away that the result is cost saving, but we're going to test the sensitivity by halving things like the effectiveness rate and seeing if those results hold true. So in terms of statistical significance, in terms of cost effectiveness. So we're going to do a bit more work teasing some of this out. And at what point does it not become, for example, cost effective? What's the threshold? Is it 5% reduction, 10% reduction? And then it helps make those decision making about implementation side of things.
Thanks, Brett. Just before we go on to the next one, is there a comment from Nick? A good point. Is there an unintended consequence, therefore, that this result is perceived as evidence that once a day cleaning is fine and you don't need to bother to clean between anymore?
Yeah, that it could be that perception, and that's not what we tested. But yeah, I mean, certainly what we can say, cleaning well at least once a day seems to make a difference. And just on that rate of infection, I think the other thing is it shows the important dynamic between the hands and the environment. And whilst the intervention itself focused on shared medical equipment, these are things that are so frequently touched with contaminated hands, arguably, that pose an ongoing reservoir and risk to others, which are demonstrated through that sort of beginning of the study, through survival of the environment and also prior room occupancy risk. So maybe we're not thinking about shared equipment as a prior risk, if you like. And of course, hands are a critical part in that dynamic. So yeah.
Thanks, Brett. Another question from Tom, which is all about retention of cleaning staff in the UK. There's a lot of turnover with cleaning staff. So Tom is asking whether or not temporary cleaning or bank agency staff were trained as part of this study.
Yeah, we actually there's a big pool of cleaners at the hospital, and they're actually, by and large, their contract is casual. They're given their sort of rosters a couple of weeks in advance. And what we did is earmarks from that pool people who wanted to work for us. So essentially they were casual staff to start with, and pretty much casual paid by us too. And I think that the reason they're casual is probably for more industrial reasons and a hospital decision, which I don't think is great for sustainability and in terms of a workforce, and being able to improve your workforce and to work with them collaboratively. But so I think it was a difficult group to have to. I don't think difficult in terms of personal group, but in terms of that setup of casual staff, it was a difficult one to try and get a trial implemented in, and luckily we managed to do that.
If I can just carry on from that, it's my own question, but this is really powerful data, and I tweeted about, or X'd it, whatever you call it nowadays, about I thought it's the most powerful data that we've had on these interventions and reducing healthcare associated infections. Do you think there's enough evidence there to actually try and change policy within healthcare organizations, whether or not that's to recruit more cleaners, to invest in more time to clean shared medical equipment, or to emphasize to procurement people that the role of cleaning and disinfection is so important in the reduction of infections? Do you think there's enough there to start for people to maybe take it more seriously or change policy?
I do. I think the thing that will really help is the cost effectiveness that will come. This study did not cost much money. This study cost 100,000 Australian dollars, which is less than one FTE full-time nurse. That included extra product costs, the time costs of additional cleaning, training and auditing, and the feedback. So one nurse in a 450-bed hospital to save us a bunch of infections. It's a no-brainer. You can work out the maths quite simply yourself, that it's no-brainer in terms of if it's going to be cost saving. So I think that's going to be an important thing when we come out with that kind of information publicly about that to help with the implementation side. And I often also get asked concurrently about disinfectant. Would you have seen the same result if you just improved cleaning and it wasn't a disinfectant product? And my answer to that is I don't know. But what I could say is that there is no RCT that shows that improving this cleaning with a detergent would have the same results. What we do have now is an RCT that shows if you do use this approach and not just focusing on the detergent, the disinfectant detergent component, but the three components, it does have this effect. So I go where the evidence is, and that's where the evidence is right now, until someone can do an RCT that shows that just improving cleaning would be just as effective. Because I think there are some other advantages with using a disinfectant as opposed to the detergent that we saw, particularly when we're talking about this once a day type cleaning approach.
Okay, thanks, Brett. We've talked quite a lot about training and engaging cleaning staff, but actually quite a lot of this type of cleaning of the shared medical equipment is or should be at least done by other professional groups, predominantly bedside nurses, but also medical staff occasionally, although I'm not sure I've actually seen a member of the medical team wipe down a piece of shared equipment on a ward, but sorry to any doctors out there. So the question is from Sharon, how did you measure the impact of this study on the non-cleaning staff who are delivering the same task or similar tasks?
So if I understand that correctly, we in the intervention phase, do we know whether cleaning staff cleaned more or cleaned less? I'll assume that's sort of what that means. We don't know the answer to that. So it's possible that during that intervention phase, we had our additional cleaners going in, but those who were primarily responsible for it originally, that is clinical staff, started cleaning more. That could have happened. They could have gone, oh well, we're noticing all this cleaning going on, maybe we should do it ourselves. Conversely, the other side could have happened too. They might have gone, well, others are cleaning it now, so we don't need to clean it. And this is where I think the implementation part, when we model these different things and scenario model these down the track, they've all got pros and cons. I think when you do what we did, you've got great line of sight of this is the resource we're putting in, this is the role, this is the only role, and we can evaluate that and we can control that. The downside of that are the challenges we talked about with being a monotonous job, with the employment, and other challenges with getting cleaning staff to do it. The other extreme would be, okay, go back to clinicians and say, we've got evidence this works, you should do it. I would also say that's great, maybe we should, but from the time and motion study, which I didn't present today, we know that these pieces of equipment, as part of the subset, we monitored how long it took to clean these pieces of equipment. On average, some of these pieces of equipment take quite a long time. A dressing trolley, 3 minutes, commode, 4 minutes. So if we're asking clinical staff to do this, then what are they not doing? Or are we going to increase the workload of our clinic? If we're going to increase the workload, they're not going to do something else. If we're saying we have to do this, or we're going to have to increase the workload of clinical stuff, in terms of FTE, which is silly waste of resources, expensive waste of resources. So I think the answer is somewhere in between, and or looking at a centralized model. We're going to try and look at that as big space costs related to a centralized model of cleaning and distribution of equipment, but maybe still it's a cost-effective way. And then you could bring in technology to help that centralized cleaning, which might be more attractive to retain and employ cleaners in that context. So that's the implementation stuff we're gonna model and come to in future months.
Thanks, Brett. This is a great question. I was at a conference yesterday, and it was a healthcare estates conference, and there was lots of people advertising, robots for cleaning floors and UV and all the rest of it. So Alma asks, there's a lot of interest in mechanical robot types of cleaning, e.g. UVC. Your study based good old basics of cleaning. What's your take between modern technology developments versus proper cleaning by staff?
Yeah. Good question. I think has to be a role for both. I think there's really important innovation that is coming and is out there, and I think there'll be a lot more to come that will help with automation of some of this. But fundamentally, we still need to physically clean to remove organic material, and that is difficult, particularly when we're talking about shared medical equipment. So I think that some of the automation in terms of routine cleaning might continue to improve, and we might actually have technology that reduces the contamination levels in the first place at a patient or an organizational level, contaminating equipment and the environment. So I'm all for all those types of things, and I think it's always going to be a combination. I don't think we're going to get away from the need, particularly for this stuff in the short term and probably medium term, to clean these pieces of equipment with a manual process.
Okay, maybe just as a follow-up from the same person, if you had budget to either buy a robot for decontamination or employ an extra member of staff for cleaning, which one would you pursue?
Well, for this, I would certainly be going a member of staff. So if it was other elements of cleaning, then I'd consider both options, to be honest, because I think there's an important role, perhaps in particularly discharge or terminal cleaning, for some automation. Yeah, I'd have, for this, no-brainer for me. It's a person.
Yeah. Sorry, John, I'm going to just build on that. Do you think that within the role of cleaners and the integral role that they play in hospital hygiene, there is a role for really targeted hygiene and having maybe somebody whose responsibility is to clean high risk equipment like shared medical equipment? Do you think that could be a position in the future?
Yeah, I do, and I think that to me is becoming clearer. So I think there's a few different elements to that. I think if we look at the big risk, the prior occupancy is a great example of that. Probably get good bang for our buck if we can do some better terminal cleans to reduce the risk for the next person. High touch surfaces, and so that can be, we've seen automation in terms of Dev Anderson's work, for example, and others. In terms of routine of high touched surfaces, we saw that with the REACH study. The importance of those really frequent touch points within a room being cleaned routinely. And in fact, that study, anyway, I got that. So, and then for this study, it's it's the shared medical equipment. So I actually think targeting those three and doing them really well would probably have a really great impact from a cleaning point of view and an IPC prevention point of view.
Okay, Cherry asks, do you know whether there was a ripple effect on other types of routine audit, for example, hand hygiene, if the staff sort of got wise to the fact that things were being monitored, was there a ripple effect?
Mm. So we monitored hand hygiene compliance. There's a standard program like there is in the UK around 5 months of hand hygiene, formal auditing process. Separate auditors go and audit that regularly. That happened throughout the trial. We didn't see any change in hand hygiene compliance. We don't think there was a ripple effect, either positive or negative, because it could go either way in terms of hand hygiene. So yeah, no major changes to hand hygiene.
Fab. I think we have time for one more.
Yep.
Sharon is asking, this is an intervention, as you say, a no-brainer towards improving and reducing our HCAIs with just once a day. Just imagine if we could follow up with cleaning in between by healthcare workers, staff. I agree with that. Do you, Brett?
I do. It'd be fascinating to see what type of additional response they have. Once you do these trials, you go, oh, wouldn't it have been good to add this in or have done that in? But yeah, I'd love to be able to do that. It's a great point. I mean, there are lots of things I'd like to explore and hopefully will in the coming few years around this that extends this trial. Because when you do something, it always has more questions. And ultimately, the questions we're trying to answer here, going right back to the start of why we did it, was to answer and help address problems that lots of people are facing and provide evidence for that. And I hope this is the start of much more to come from this program of work, either by me or by others that can build on it.
Okay, one final quick question. What would be your pitch to your hospital board based on this study?
Yeah, my pitch would be not investing in this study, not investing in this intervention, forgoes you the opportunity to improve healthcare outcomes for patients and worsen your financial budget.
Okay, I like the way you phrased that. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, another way to phrase it could be not doing this is stupid because you're wasting money and you're killing patients. But I think a more political way to do it would be the way I describe it.
Yeah. Nicely put. Okay, great way to finish. Thank you, Brett. So just to make everybody aware, it's not 10 o'clock in the morning in Australia. Brett, what time is it?
It's 7:45 in PM.
PM. Okay, well, thank you for joining us late into the evening, eating into your precious time. It's great to have you and an Aussie on board. I'm on my way to Cardiff on Friday to see England beat Australia in the cricket.
No.
So we can just look out for that. So what's next? The next IPC Journal Club is scheduled for early October. Phil's going to lead that one on biofilms, implications for cleaning and disinfection. And I'll be facilitating the Q&A. I wrote a blog on Brett's study on reflections a week or so ago, so take a look at that. There's the link there. In terms of the schedule for future Journal Club, we're trying to get a bit more organised to make it easier for you and your diary. So the schedule is live on the IPC Partners website, and you can subscribe. So we'll put a post out every time we schedule a new Journal Club, and you can get an email that way. And recordings of past Journal Clubs are now available on the YouTube channel there. And as I mentioned at the start, this Journal Club is hosted by IPC Partners. So finally, thank you to you for coming. This wouldn't work without your interest and interesting questions. Thank you to Brett for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot, Brett.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.